Welcome to May's Tech of the Month, where we discuss all the latest news and reviews. This month, we're going to take a closer look at the rumours circulating around a potential new Tarmac SL8. We've got some Back to the Future style shoes, and I spoke to an expert about the new carbon threaded bottom bracket shell, which was debuted at the Sea Otter Classic show. And he had some pretty interesting things to say about it.
So, that new Tarmac SL8, what do we know about it?
Well, I think there's a couple of things to highlight, but the first one that we can be pretty confident about is that they will be using integrated all-in-one brand new cockpit from in-house brand Rysel. Now, there have been a couple of leaked pictures online on the Weight Weenies website, and they do look pretty cool. There have been some riders that have actually been using them earlier this year as well, but they kind of look aero, obviously completely integrated, and they look fairly light as well. But we can't confirm whether those bars that were leaked have come from a Specialized production line, so we can't be fully sure if they are the genuine article.
And in terms of when the bike is likely to land with us, what are you thinking there?
Well, I think there's a couple of things to think about here. Is that this is one of the most significant launches that Specialized would have in its road category in this year. And that means they're going to want a really big stage to launch this bike from. So you've got to think something like the Dauphiné, the Tour de France, the World Champs, the Vuelta. It's got to be a really big stage when there's a lot of eyes on that bike. And given the fact that there was a box spotted down in Australia which was labelled up as an SL8 S-Works Tarmac frame set, if that is with a retailer, that would suggest that it is pretty soon. I think one thing is also worth bearing in mind, and it's a suspicion that we have, is that this bike, it's likely to be quite an iterative increase in terms of performance over the SL7. The fact is the SL7 is still an incredibly popular bike, and you have to wonder how much further they can really take it. Obviously, we'll probably likely see all of the usual claims of being lighter, stiffer and more aero, but the overall frame shape, I don't think we're going to see anything too radical in terms of changes. I think they will be very small. So those bikes could be flying under the radar, and potentially it's going to take someone very eagle-eyed to spot them.
Potentially, because with the change of the SL7 and how it took over from the Vengevise, it would almost give us whiplash if they were to come around having like large tube shapes, and similar to the Trek Madone and the Scott Foil. There are some brands who are still pushing that, but obviously Specialized, they slim down and claim that they can still deliver high aerodynamic performance even with slimmer tubes. Similar to the Giant Propel. And so I think that it does make sense, as you say, that Specialized is going to be continuing in this vein. There's only like so many times that you can change up and innovate and like completely disrupt your line of bikes, and say this one, I think, as you say, might be a little bit business as usual.
Absolutely. I think one other potential that's worth considering is that if Specialized were to bring back the Venge name, it would mean that the Tarmac would then have to double down on potentially compliance, stiffness and weight. If they do bring the Venge back, which for a brand that has always said aero is everything, you have to imagine that the Venge could make a comeback at some point, and potentially in a very funky design with the relaxation of the UCI rules. I think that would then mean that the Tarmac has to then become a really lightweight kind of do-it-all race bike, but obviously something not quite as light as the Athos. But of course, the Tarmac will always be more aero than the Athos, and potentially the Athos has also been around for a very long time, so perhaps that bike is also due an upgrade, which could come this year. It wouldn't be out of the question. That's been around for 3-4 years, so it could happen. I think one thing that's also worth thinking about is that at the beginning of the year, when we saw the launch of all these new Project Black components, I think that when the new Tarmac does come, I think there'll be a lot of wording and language surrounding system weight and system performance. So no longer would you be looking at it as just a frame set, but you'd be looking at it as a frame set, a seat post, a set of bars, and maybe even the wheels as well. So I think to help them extrapolate bigger numbers out of aero performance and weight savings, I think, because we've seen a lot of brands go down this route.
Yeah, Pinarello especially.
Exactly. Right. So yeah, I think we are definitely going to see kind of more system savings rather than talking about the frame as an independent thing.
So it seems that 2023, rather than 2015 as you might have expected, is turning out to be somewhat the year of the Back to the Future cycling products. We've had a little bit earlier the propel sunglasses, which had a striking similarity to Doc Brown's mirror shield visor glasses, and now we've got a patent application from Shimano for self-tightening shoes, which I think is quite interesting.
That is very cool. So how do they work, and what's the patent for?
So it's essentially a bow dial, and so this is a motor integrated into it, which is doing the twisting for you. And so it's done electronically, it's done wirelessly. But with that gives scope for having a certain degree of control over when the shoe is tightening and when it might be backing off a little, which is, I think, quite interesting.
Okay, so if you were getting ready for a sprint, could you then ask it to tighten up your shoes?
Yeah, and so presumably, not only could you tell it to tighten up your shoes if you're gearing up for a sprint a little bit, but you could set certain parameters. Potentially you could hook this up so it sees what speed you're putting out, sees what power you're putting out, and so you should be able to put these parameters in so it'll back off when you're taking it easy. And then, when you're gearing up, when you're putting the power out, it cinches up your shoes and you don't have to think about it.
That sounds pretty cool. Not to be the one that drops a water balloon on all of this, because it does sound very cool. I am also thinking now that there's 2 more sets of batteries to charge, and as much as I love a boa dial, they aren't bomb-proof. And then introducing a motor into that equation, surely that's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, exactly. Like in terms of points for failure, there's a lot there. Now, the last thing that you want is for the battery to die on your shoe and for your shoe to be stuck on your foot.
Yes.
It's really not something ideal, even more frustrating than not being able to shift. And so,
manual override would definitely be needed on those shoes, for sure.
I really think so. And I think that this maybe speaks to what I think that we might be coming towards a little bit, that it would be really good with all the electronics, all the peripherals that we do have. If there was one central battery that everything could be run off, we've got the head units, we've got lights, the power meters. If you're going on a training camp or something, the number of cables that you need and the number of sockets you need to make sure that you're prepared ahead of every ride.
So are you suggesting then that if the shoes could be powered via the pedal, maybe that could be the solution?
I mean, this is something that I'd really, really like to see, and I feel like it should be possible. For instance, Garmin has the extra battery pack that you can attach underneath. It's got those little connectors, and so surely something could be done with a cleat and connecting to the crank, connecting to an internal battery that powers this unit rather than having a battery pack on the back of your shoe.
I mean, this genuinely is over-engineering to another level just so you can have your shoes tighten automatically. But it does kind of sound great. And this is the thing, obviously there is SmartSense in the world on Cannondale bikes, which powers your lights and your radar. And the concept behind it isn't necessarily a bad one, it's just that potentially SmartSense didn't quite have the right execution behind it. But if there was a central power source that could run gears, lights, head unit, power meter, whatever, that is a good idea. It's just we're waiting for the right implementation of actually creating it.
Exactly, and then I suppose to come back to Shimano's actual patent itself, it isn't coming up with this ecosystem. It's just got its own little part of this, which is the motor in the shoes. So this is all just to say, if we are to have yet more electronics, for our riding, it would be really good if there was a larger solution that was created. So here there have been some developments in the world of bottom brackets.
Yeah, so it's quite an interesting one. There's a company based in Canada called Bridge Bike Works, and they released a new bike at the Sea Otter Classic show, and this was kind of the platform for them to show off this new bottom bracket shell, which, when you boil it down, essentially what you've got are the threads for the bottom bracket within the carbon itself. So there is no aluminium bonded shell that sits within the frame. You literally screw your bottom bracket directly into the frame itself. This is a one of a kind. This is the first time this has been done, and the brand Bridge Bike Works do make a couple of claims about why this is a good thing to do. First being that it can save anywhere between 70 and 100 grams out of the weight of the frame, which on the surface sounds pretty good. The other thing that they do say is that because it is part of the moulding process, you can have perfect alignment because it is part of the whole frame creation process.
So how they actually achieve this? Because normally the reason why you would use sort of a metal insert and metal threads is because carbon it's not strong enough to sort of withstand of forces. And so what have they done so that the threads aren't just pulled out of the frame?
Well, this is it. So they have coated the threads in, they call it a Cerakote coating, which they say strengthens the threads. And they've also tested those threads up to 2 to 3 times the level of torque the bottom bracket should actually be inserted at. So they've gone above and beyond the torque that you would ever need to go for a bottom bracket, and they say that it's still fine. And they were able to remove the bottom bracket safely afterwards, which is the key thing. Now, I did speak to a carbon fibre specialist on this. We have a carbon fibre repair place down here in Surrey. And I asked them, and I put the technology to them to ask them what their concerns or just general thoughts are. And they had a couple of interesting insights. First being, metal and carbon are very different because carbon itself, it is subject to abrasion. So over time, you would think that the carbon itself could wear down. They said that potentially after 3 to 4 insertions of a bottom bracket, it might not be fitting the same way. I'm sure British Bike Works would come back and say, well, actually, it's got the Cerakote coating, so it would be fine. That's the first thing. The other thing that they did say is that it could also be quite susceptible to road salts and galvanic corrosion. But again, British Bike Works would come back and say that we've got that Cerakote coating. So
sounds like it's doing a lot of work there.
Exactly, that Cerakote coating is basically holding the show together. So now, while British Bike Works have over-torqued it by 2 to 3 times and have said that it's perfectly strong and safe, there is the issue that should something happen, essentially, you could be writing your frame off. Because if you pull those threads out of the frame, the question then remains, what do you do then? British Bike Works have come back on that and also said that if the threads do get damaged to the extent that you couldn't fit a bottom bracket, you could then bore out the frame and then install your more typical aluminium metal shell and bond that into the frame, so you could then have... Exactly. However, I think the logistics and practicalities of that might not be as good as it sounds on the surface, because if I'm a buyer here in the UK, I rip the threads out of my frame, well then what do I do with my bike? Do I then have to send that all the way back to Canada to be repaired to then come all the way back to me? And you've really got to wonder if that 70 to 100 gram saving is really worth it. I think it's very interesting to see. I don't think that this would be adopted by a big brand. I think it does make sense for a small brand to kind of come out with this technology because it's not something that could really work for the mass market. But it's interesting to see. I just really question whether the benefits really outweigh the current offering.
So it looks like Decathlon has been updating its range of bikes, particularly the Van Rysel top of range premium Decathlon bike. What can you tell me about them?
Well, so there was a whole new range on display at Sea Otter Classic again, and I'll run through some of those, the names of those bikes and what those bikes are. So first up, there's the RCR, which is their aero do-it-all kind of road bike. There's the FCR, which is another aero bike, but it's more aimed at kind of crit racing. There's the Gravel GCR, which is a carbon gravel bike. There's the NCR, which is their endurance bike. And then there's the Gravel TI, which, as you guessed it, is a titanium gravel bike. So it's a pretty good range, but I think the one that we're most interested in at the moment is the RCR.
And so what kind of features, is it packing? Does it go toe-to-toe with giant propel? Specialized?
Well, when you look at it on the surface, I think it strikes a pretty remarkable resemblance to the SL7. And for me, when you look at the seat stays in particular, they look very similar. But I mean, it's got all the bells and whistles that you would expect to see. Everything's fully integrated. It's got those drop seat stays. It looks very trick and very modern. So I think, it doesn't look out of place in terms of, the current crop of bikes out on the market.
Yeah. Do we know anything about the weight just yet, or is that a little bit off the cards for now?
So I believe the Dura-Race version of the RCR will be coming in around 6.8 kilos, so that UCI weight limit, which is handy, because potentially these bikes could find themselves under the riders of AG2R Citroën in the future. Potentially. It's not confirmed, but it could happen.
That's very interesting. And well, I think that, with having looked at the UCI list of approved frame sets a little bit earlier, had a little look at Decathlon's range. And quite interestingly, their previous models of bikes, and they've had UCI approved frame sets since 2019. They've had other models in 2021, but this RCR isn't there yet as of the 1st of May. And so if they are going to be partnering with a World Tour team, the frame set isn't there yet. And so there's still time until the 2024 season.
I think it's a really good move And I think it's really interesting because Van Rysel, Decathlon have made their intentions really clear for these bikes. They want to become one of the top 5 global brands of bikes. So that is a tall order to make, and it's quite an ambitious target to have. But Decathlon in Europe at least, it's a pretty well-established brand with a really good distribution network. And I think if they can get a really good foothold in the US, it could happen.
Absolutely. I think that a really interesting one with Decathlon is that like their products are really, really quite cheap. They're not like as affordable as we still might like, but they're still a lot cheaper than many of the other brands and what they're selling their own products for. But I think with that, it comes a connotation of like it being a little bit of a budget option. It's hard to ignore the kind of like overtones of snobbishness that certain people might exude when it comes to Decathlon and Van Rysel bikes, which makes you question, can this be overcome, this brand perception be overcome by just the quality of the products, or are they going to have to raise their prices to be taken seriously?
Exactly, and this I completely agree with you. That is the biggest question that I have, because is a customer for a Dura-Race bike going to walk into a Decathlon and purchase their bike from one of those stores? That's the image that I can't kind of put together in my head. I just don't think it stacks up. Potentially, customers for 105 Ultegra bikes, perhaps that is a reality. But I think for your top-end Dura-Race customer, I think that's where they might struggle with those connotations. And the only real way to battle that, perhaps, is to either open up their distribution network to include bike shops, local bike shops, or they'll need a direct-to-consumer way of delivering bikes, or even perhaps, like you say, raising those prices to make sure that they're in line with the competitors, so they are essentially taken as seriously as the Specialized Treks giants of the world.
So, in terms of the prices then, like where's the RCR coming in at?
So, as a benchmark for a new SRAM Force Axis build with Zip 404 Firecrests, over in the States, that would set you back just shy of $7,000. In Europe, it'd be 4,700 euros. So quite a big difference there, but does represent a level of value when you compare it to other rival models, which I think you have an SL7.
Yeah, up in front of me now, I've got the Tarmac SL7, and that's $9,000 for essentially the same spec, wheels of a similar depth, also with a power meter, but $9,000.
So you've got a $2,000 difference there. Let us know in the comments, is that enough to... Because, I mean, clearly that is a huge amount of saving, but is the $7,000 mark still too high, perhaps? I don't know. It'd be interesting to hear from you guys what you think of that pricing. But, I mean, on the face of it, saving $2,000 and still essentially getting the same functionality is quite good. Another thing worth thinking about is that if Van Rysel and Decathlon do go down the World Tour sponsorship route and do start supplying AG2R Citroën with bikes, you've got to wonder what's going to happen to the prices in the future, because it's not out of the question that they could rise. They can grab the headlines now at the launch, posing as great value, but as that sponsorship cost bites, perhaps we could see those prices rise and maybe become more in line with their competitors. Only time will tell on that. But the bikes look interesting, and for that amount of value, it's something that we are certainly very interested in, and hopefully we'll be able to get our hands on them very soon for testing. Let us know down in the comments, what do you think of this new range of Van Rysel bikes? If you enjoyed the video, then please do drop it a like, subscribe to the channel for more content, and we will see you again very soon.